All right. Welcome to another edition of Shabbat Lounge. This is Matt,
And Jake here.
and feels like it's been a minute, but in reality, I guess it hasn't. But
Yeah.
good to see you, Jake.
Good to see you.
And
I guess it all depends on when people show up to listen.
That's right. That's right. And back by popular demand, you can see our face.
That's right.
So, hello to all. And Jake and I have been busy doing lots of things, and in my life, I have having children, and so we went from one grandkid to three grandkids from January to February. Our nest grew.
Yeah. That's big news, big excitement.
Yep. And then, and if you hear the wind, if you hear noise in the background, we have this crazy wind happening tonight. So we got a 50, 60 mile an hour wind blowing.
That's right.
So, in fact, I was sitting here earlier going, Jake, what is that sound?
Yeah, we thought the planes were flying over and the AC was cranked up.
Sounds like they're doing an engine test or something right here.
Yeah.
So, well, Jake, what are we talking about today?
So today, with the understanding that there's always new people coming in and new audience and everything, I think some people more with more time into this have probably studied this out a little bit. So, but we're gonna look at Romans 14 because I don't think you can look at the basics too often. Romans isn't really a basic book, but the theory behind what's going on here is going to be pretty basic, and it should be generally one of the first arguments you hear when you come to Torah is going to bring you to this section. So if you haven't seen this issue come up before, now's your chance to kind of hear some back and forth about thought processes as pertains to Romans 14 and how a lot of people will drive you to this to say, well, no, the law is done away with, and Romans 14 shows it. So we'll kind of go through this a little bit.
Okay. So you want me to read?
Sure.
So Romans 14:1, and we're reading from the King James, says, Him that is weak in faith receive ye, but not doubtful disputation. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth. For Yahweh hath received him. Who art thou that judges another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth, yea, he shall be holden up, for Yahweh is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man may be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto Elohim, and he that regardeth not the day to Yahuwah, he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to Yahuwah, for he giveth Yahuwah thanks, and he that eateth not to Yahuwah, he eateth not and giveth Yahuwah thanks. For none of us live to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live, we live unto Yahweh. For whether we die into Yahweh. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are Yahweh's.
Okay, that's probably good. I mean, that's the section that people will bring up. So right off the bat, I think the first thing that kind of jumps out is verse 5. One man esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. So, Matt, have you heard someone pull out this verse and argue one way or another for probably against why we would need to keep Torah?
Yeah, they would say that we would be the weaker brother if we feel like we have to keep the seventh-day Sabbath or a feast day.
Right, because there's one Sabbath, one day that you're esteeming as a Sabbath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what if I esteem another day as a Sabbath? And they're saying, well, as long as you're persuaded, it's fine. So that's how that verse will be used. But if we look at, let's just count go back to the first verse and we'll count how many times they're talking about eating here. So him that's weak in the faith, there's one. Two.
What do you mean weak?
Okay. Eat in verse 2. No, I was just looking
okay,
through.
yeah, eat in
So verse 2. So it's twice in verse 2. And then there again in okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Scroll down a little bit. 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times just in the first 6 verses. So and then there it is again. That's seat, actually. And meat and meat and meat.
Meat. Eateth, eat.
Eat.
So yeah,
eat.
a good 27 times.
Yeah. So so it seems like he's actually talking about eating. He's not talking about a specific day. He's not talking about the Sabbath. And if you review Romans, you'll see that the word Sabbath isn't used once in the whole book. So to pull this out and say, well, he's talking about the Sabbath, or to extend this principle to apply to the Sabbath, is just not taking the context of what he's actually talking about. So Paul's actually talking about eating here.
Yeah, and I think we've got this pulled up, which is kind of handy too. So we have the Blue Letter Bible pulled up, and I guess we should have started right there, but Romans 14:8. Is that the right one? No, I picked the wrong one. Which is the one about the day?
5. Yep, so he esteems one day, Hemera.
The day.
Used of time in general.
But it definitely does not use the word Sabbath.
Right.
But I think you're right. Many times people say that that's what it means, but just saying during the day, you don't eat at night, I guess. Most people, when you're asleep, I don't recommend that. You might asphyxiate, or you might aspirate food in your lungs, and that's bad.
Yeah.
So, yeah, don't eat in your sleep. And I think it's more implying that kind of language. But I don't know. It one man esteemeth one day above the other. So what are you saying that means then, I guess?
So another principle that a fairly common verse to look at, we didn't pull this one up, but and I don't remember the address for it, but remember when the Pharisee said, well, I fast twice a week.
Right.
Right. So this to me is more talking of eating meat sacrificed to idols and days that you choose to fast. Because you have, if you scroll up a little bit,
yep,
you
I can see that.
You have someone who's eating and then someone who's not eating, right? Verse 3 there. Let him that eats despise him that doesn't eat. So you have a day where the Pharisees had determined, oh, these are the days that we fast, and I'm super special because I do it twice a week. And so this is kind of the topic that's being discussed here.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So yeah, we challenge you to look up what we just said, and the one reason we do this is we try to show you some tools so that we firmly believe that when you study Scripture, you and I both, we don't have to go listen and do just because somebody says so. we should be able to read this book for ourselves and understand it.
Right.
And it helps it helps to know kind of these tricks of looking at the original language and seeing that they don't use Sabbatone here. And that would change it completely, but that's not what they're saying here. And I think you're right, to read this in context and think about what it's talking about.
Right. And I think another place we're going to go here is going to parallel this pretty well. So here he's talking to the Romans, right? And now if we go to 1 Corinthians 8, we're going to see that he's talking to a different group of people, but he's giving basically the same message. And in some places, he'll even use the same verbiage. So, and that's 1 Corinthians 8.
Well, if we need to, we'll pull it up in the blue letter, but there it is.
Okay.
Let me switch here.
Okay. All right. So 1 Corinthians 8 says, "Now as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but charity edifies. And if any man thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing, yet as he ought to know. But if any man loves Elohim, the same is known of him. As concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered and sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other Elohim but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one Elohim, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Master, Yeshua Messiah, by whom all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But meat commendeth us not to Elohim, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see you, which has knowledge, sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Messiah died. But when you sin so against the brother and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Messiah. Wherefore, if meat makes my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world stands, lest I make my brother to offend." So there's so much in here, but if you look down, scroll down to, keep going a little bit. Oh, verse 8, I think, is same exact verbiage. Remember, meat here is just food. It's not necessarily speaking of specific meat. But food commends us not to Elohim, for if we eat, we are neither better, or if we don't eat, we're neither worse, right? So here, this whole context is meat sacrificed to idols. So they would go into the market, and everyone would be having their cults and their false religions and their rising up to play, as it were, and bringing the meat from that ceremony out and selling it at the meat market, right? Mm-hmm. And so here he's saying, we know that the idol isn't really a thing. We all know that it's just someone making something up in place of Yahweh. And so you know it's not a thing, and I know it's not a thing. That guy over there, he doesn't know it's not a thing. So when I go to the market and I get meat that has been sacrificed to an idol, and I eat it, and he sees me eat it, he's going to associate that with me praising this idol as a thing. Mm-hmm. Now, there is a command not to eat meat sacrificed to idols. But this is working on a case, you'll see also in that same area where it talks about not eating meat sacrificed to idols, you'll see it talk about if you know that it's sacrificed to idols, don't eat it. Refuse it if someone offers it to you. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know, just eat it, because it's not a thing.
That's right. And this is a situation where they didn't have grocery stores. They didn't have HEB around the corner. And if you're not from Texas, you don't know what HEB is, and it's okay, but you should know.
Yeah.
But so they'd go to these markets, and people are just selling their meats. And, you didn't really know where that came from. Kind of like today.
Yeah.
So we don't know what's been done. We don't know on especially chicken and things like that. If we grew it here, shipped it to China, and they cut it up and froze it and shipped it back to us, we wouldn't know.
Right.
They're supposed to tell you, but then I think they changed the rule and they don't have to tell you. So I mean, and really, if we have food like that, there is really no telling what someone else might do or say over that food.
Right.
They could have offered it to something.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Exactly.
So, but if we go and we know that it's been offered up for food, I think that is different, and we're not supposed to eat it. But there is provision for these folks, and there were people in this community that decided to not eat meat at all and be vegan or vegetarian because they were afraid of doing this, and that's part of the rub that you see here. And it's not this group of people eating pork and this other group of people not eating pork,
right?
Because the context is vegetables
or
meat
Mm-hmm. It's not or pork.
Yeah.
So that was a good point you brought up, and I'm glad you did, about there were the vegetables that we saw in Romans 14. It was people that were too afraid to eat meat because they didn't know where it came from, and they didn't want to be, breaking a command.
And he doesn't say that's bad.
Right.
And in fact, he's saying, if I'm eating meat and it's bothering you, I shouldn't do it.
Right. So scroll down to the end here. This is a good point too. Verse 13. If meat makes my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world stands, lest I make my brother to offend. So someone that's coming to you and saying, oh, you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. And then they order pork in front of you. They've just told you, I think you're a weak brother. And now they're eating something that you think is offensive, whether it is or not, which it is. But even in their eyes, whether it is or not, now they're eating it in front of you, which offends you. And now they've broken this obvious command. So,
yeah.
I don't know how many times that's happened to me, but it's just a weird dichotomy, because in the same breath of claiming the Romans 14 verse, which is exactly the same concept as the 1 Corinthians 8 verse, that they'll deride you for it, and then they'll offend you with the way they eat, and they're kind of standing on both sides of that. They're kind of wrong in both sides of that, and it's kind of, it can be easy to get offended by that, but I think we need to, especially early on, I would get real offended by stuff like that, where it's like, this looks so obvious to me, and you're breaking this in both places. But try just, if someone steps on your toe, just take a step back. It's, you don't have to go World War III over slight things like this. I know it feels like it's a real big deal in the moment, especially early on, but turns out it's not a super deal. Just hold on to your witness, and eventually, you don't want to burn that bridge, because you can't come back to it.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's right. Well, and we challenge you to look at these scriptures and think about it in this context, because most of us probably were taught that this was about Sabbath, feast keeping, dates, things like that, and about eating pork and not eating pork. And I challenge you to find how this says this is about the Moedim, the feast dates, and about eating pork. Right. So, and I think that's where you can take someone and just have them prove it to you in the original language, and just, and I think what you're saying too is you can kind of point people, but they have to go want to look at it and research it a little bit, and if they're not willing to do that, then they may never see it.
Yeah, and I think a good way to go about that is not to just spew these verses at people,
Yeah.
but ask them to show you in detail what their point is, because the context will always bear out the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they go, well, I got to go ask my pastor or something, I would just challenge them to just encourage them nicely to be confident that they can know scripture themselves. And I think you can say that real nice, but if you don't want to come across as condescending, but you can say it in a way that would edify them. This is like, how can you know if this is the right thing to say? If your words are going to either challenge or edify them, and it's spurring them to do something good, and empowering them and giving them, the sense of ownership and feeling like, hey, yeah, I could learn this, because some people are so
personal responsibility.
Yeah, so beat down, like, oh, I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough to know this. I got to rely on Pastor Jeff because he's so smart. That's ridiculous. I mean, to me, that's it's quitter talk for one. So
right.
But
yeah, on a note with that, typically someone who's bringing these verses up to you, if they're typically they're going to be puffed up enough, as this first verse is
that's
saying,
what I was going to get
that
at, yeah.
They're not going to necessarily say, well, let me see what my pastor says.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be, and I think this is just a human reaction is,
Mm-hmm.
You challenge someone to, oh, well, show me exactly what you're talking about. I might be prideful enough just to show you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I show you, I got egg on my face because it may not work out the way you thought sometimes. So pride can kind of backfire on people.
Yeah, I was kind of curious what that word was in 1 Corinthians. Let me go back to it. 1 Corinthians 8:1 about charity. So I was curious to see if we apologize if you hear the wind whistling, but that's just crazy wind that we're having springtime in Texas. So the charity scripture, I was trying to figure out about what that is. Agape. Huh. That's interesting. So you look at that word charity and you don't think love, but agape is a version of love. But it also involves benevolence.
Yep. Yeah, showing affection to others. Yeah.
Oh.
There you go. That's better.
So that's looking at the Strong's on the word agape there. So, and so, what does that mean? Well, I think that means that I think we're guilty of this in the Torah community. We can definitely be puffed up with our own pride and think we know a thing or two. And he's basically, to me, I read this, that, going out and doing good works for other people kind of help you, it benefits you and kind of helps keep this knowledge in check.
Right.
Because you can know all this stuff, but if you walk by the guy on the side of the road that needs help, what good is it doing you?
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot at in our fellowship group about, when we have fellowship and we're learning and iron sharpening iron and all these things, and we have all these ideas and we go listen to Torah teachers and, we can gain all this knowledge, but if we just hold on to it, it does nothing for us. The point is to use it to walk our lives out in the way that Messiah would walk and be an example to those around us. So,
Well, and don't you think in verse 2, one way to translate this is if you think you know something, the more you know, you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I think that if you're honest and you examine scripture, if you're honest with it, you realize, the more you know, the more you don't know, the more questions you have, the other things you find. Um, I think that's a dangerous thing to feel like you have it all figured out.
Yeah, I think that's why in the Torah community you have that. You can tell like a new Torah convert basically generally because they do the Torah terrorist thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that I can tell you don't have enough questions yet. You've kind of thought you've learned a bunch.
Yeah.
But you haven't fallen into the realizing you really don't know a lot. And I know that's kind of how it happened for me anyway.
Yeah. All right. What other thoughts you have here, Jake?
That's about it. I mean, if we can go back to Romans 14 just to kind of put a bow on it. Yeah. So people bring this up to but let's see, him that is weak in the faith receive you, but not to doubtful disputations. So one of the things that I bring up whenever I hear this, because people say, well, see, we're just not supposed to even argue about these things. It's like, well, hang on. The Torah, I don't doubt that that's perfect and righteous because the Bible said it earlier. You know what I mean? It's not a doubtful thing.
Mm.
This is a meat sacrifice to idols. This is a fasting. So it's not even, when to fast. It never specifically says when to fast.
No, it doesn't.
So that would be a doubtful thing that people are arguing about.
Mm-hmm. What it does say is when Yeshua talks about, he says, don't look, like
a gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah, down in the mouth when you're fasting and look bad and sad,
right.
Like the hypocrites do to get attention.
Right.
You just live your life and it shouldn't be obvious necessarily.
Right. So if Messiah came up and was like, well, are you not sure? Like if this was actually about eating pork or not eating pork, where's the doubtfulness in Scripture about that? Scripture is clear. Remember, they didn't have the New Testament here. They're looking at Old Testament Scripture, and they're going to say, well, no, he clearly says, don't eat the pigs.
Yeah.
That's not a doubtful situation.
Yeah, it wasn't even in question, and I think people forget that, because we put our lens on it, and they didn't have that lens yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's good.
Okay. So just read through this yourself and get the context of it, and you'll understand more what is actually being said here. And you'll never go wrong if someone brings up a sticky wicket, as it were, to fall back to what's the context of what you're talking about. Yeah. And don't be afraid to put it on them. You explain your thought process. Because it doesn't make sense to me. And then people tend to get scared when they have to do the talking. Yeah. When you start questioning the things they're saying, instead of responding to it, you question what they're saying, and people kind of shy away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's good. All right, well, Jake, you got anything else?
No, not for now, I guess.
Well, we appreciate that you are here, and we do want to take a minute to remind you that we have a website. And so if you just go type in sabbathlounge.com, if you're here, you probably already knew this. But if you're new to this, we do have a website with different teachings, all kinds of things. And if you can find out ways to contact us, where you can find us. And we do have a book that we've been working on, and it's not ready, it's not out, but it's dust from the floor. And Jake, can you tell them about that?
Yeah, so this is going to be a pretty interesting book, I think, once it's finished. We still have a lot of work to do on it, but it's regarding the bride and the way that, so the dust from the floor is speaking of the cup of bitter waters. And if you've listened to us for any amount of time, you know we're big on that, and how that relates to our relationship with Messiah, and how the reason that Messiah had to die on the cross. And so that's kind of what this story is going to be about, is kind of our thoughts on that topic. And so the bride and the groom and coming together and how that all works.
Yeah. So we're hoping to release it to the public in January, February, sometime in the first of next year, 2026. So about a year out. And anyway, we do have a sign-up sheet in there if you want to get on a list, and we'll send you updates. We also will be looking for people who may want an early version of it that would do a review or social media share. So let us know if you'd be interested in doing that for us, and that's how you could do it right there. So anything else, Jake?
No, I think that's it.
As always, we appreciate if you like, share, subscribe. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Tell others about what we're doing and what's about Sabbath Lounge. And we lost our camera there for a second. So, but anyway, we appreciate you being here. This is Matt
And Jake.
signing out.